David Lees is a French politics specialist and an associate professor at the University of Warwick. He joins me now live for more on this. David, first of all, how shocked were you when you heard about Sarkozy?
I was very shocked, to be honest. I don't think anybody really saw this coming. Of course, as you say, other presidents have been tried before. Famously, Jacques Chirac was tried in absentia while he was suffering from ill health, and he was sentenced to a suspended prison sentence, but not actually to prison. So it's a very surprising and shocking verdict, I think, really defined Sarkozy, in theory, being asked to spend at least 1 year in prison. Though, of course, as you say, he has since appealed, and pending that appeal will remain at large and free. Really is quite a shocking turn of events. And of course, although there's a long history to some extent of corruption within French political circles, to have a former president found guilty in this way and sentenced to a prison term of some kind is really quite shocking. This isn't to suggest I don't think that Sarkozy's future is yet over, actually. I think politically, particularly on the centre right and to some extent even on the extreme right, there are those who would say that Sarkozy is a victim of the system, as it were, and perhaps this will actually increase his own popularity. But for many in France, this does come as a shock. The office of president has always been seen as being in some ways above the law, and certainly while the president is in office, they can't be in any case investigated. So it's a major kind of turning point, really. And as I say, it opens a kind of a whole series of potential future investigations, not least into Sarkozy himself, of course, who has two further investigations to come.
Now, Sarkozy's predecessor, Jacques Chirac, as you mentioned, was found guilty 10 years ago of misuse of public money when he was the mayor of Paris. That was not considered to be officially corruption, but he was given a 2-year suspended sentence. How big a problem is corruption in the leadership of France?
Well, it seems to be quite significant. And certainly, as you say, if you look at the centre right in particular, and of course, the majority of presidents in the current Fifth Republic have come from the centre right, there does seem to be something about holding public office, whether that's at local level, as you say, with the mayor of Paris in Chirac's case, or indeed on a kind of national level, where something about that role seems to offer the opportunity for corruption. Now, I'm not suggesting everybody on the centre right in France is corrupt by any means, but what it does show is a kind of pattern here on a local level, as I say, and on a national level. If you look at Sarkozy's former prime minister while he was in office, François Fillon, of course, he's facing his own corruption scandal around the creation of jobs for his wife and children using public funds. So there's a number of sort of trends here. And what I would say is, well, look at Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, who recently, of course, sadly passed away. He was accused when he himself was in office of taking diamonds from the former African dictator Bokassa. So there's a long-term trend here. What I would suggest is it's not, not to say that everyone on the centre right is necessarily corrupt, but certainly we have to look at the bigger picture and think that actually there is something about the networks and around the environment of French politics which seems to encourage this kind of behaviour, perhaps a kind of win at all costs mentality, which lends itself towards this kind of behaviour. And certainly, I think, France has taken a very strong line on this, which is perhaps, more advanced and more kind of discerning, perhaps, than elsewhere across the Western world.
So what do you think about the future of the Conservative Party, the party Sarkozy came from, that's now called Les Républicains? Is this something that it can surmount?
Yes, I think it can. Yes, I don't think it's done anything to detract necessarily from the party's own popularity. I think, Sarkozy, as I say, himself is kind of almost increased his popularity in some ways by this verdict, because he seems, for those people who believe in conspiracy theories, to be a victim of the system, as it were. I think it's probably the case also for the centre right, particularly for the Republican Party, as you say. There is, I think, a longer term risk and longer term issue around the future of the centre right in terms of challenging for the office of the presidency when the election comes again next year, and also challenging for power in the National Assembly. After the last elections in France in 2017 at parliamentary and national level for the presidency, the centre right and centre left were largely obliterated. So there's a long way to go in terms of building themselves back up again, particularly for the centre right. I don't think it's done anything to damage their prospects necessarily, but of course Emmanuel Macron at the moment, notwithstanding issues around the vaccine take-up and so on, seems to be doing very well, and his government has weathered the storm with regards to the coronavirus crisis quite well. So looking ahead to next year, I do think it's still a big challenge for the centre-right to gain power in any way.
And what about Nicolas Sarkozy himself? Some of his supporters have been talking about him possibly running for president next year in 2022. Is that at all a possibility? Could he come back from this politically?
I would say never, but I think it's a very unlikely situation at the moment. I think that the Sarkozy brand has certain strengths, as we've established, around his core electorate, particularly when it comes to issues like law and order and immigration, which is what Sarkozy was always strong on, in 2007 and again in 2012 when he lost to Francois Hollande. But I would say that, Sarkozy could potentially, of course, try to stand, but it'd be very difficult to get the number of signatories required to be able to stand as a presidential candidate for next year, given all that's going on around his own particular issues. As I say, this is just one of three investigations into issues around corruption faced by Sarkozy at the moment. So I would say never, but it's unlikely necessarily that he would go on to stand as a presidential candidate next year.
All right, David, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us and sharing your expertise. So you're a French politics specialist and an associate professor at the University of Warwick.